With the ability to fix games post-release, this means no game needs to be broken forever, but it sure can be frustrating to see how long games stay broken for, and often developers leave it to passionate fans to get the job done. But whatever the reason or whatever the outcome, these games weren't fully in working order for years after launch. I'm Ben Roy from WhatCulture.com, and this is 10 broken video games that were fixed years later. Number 10. Aliens Colonial Marines. On paper, this game sounds like a match made in heaven. Who wouldn't want to face James Cameron's Aliens? It's just a scientific fact. But when the game finally hit stores in 2013, it was largely panned by fans and critics. Beyond the complaints of its low-effort nature of being just another movie tie-in, many felt the game was fundamentally broken due to the unbalanced nature of the game and the broken AI and the glitches and everything. In the months following the release, it became clear that developer Gear Software secretly outsourced much of the game's development without Sega knowing, resulting in the final game looking and playing worse than the original footage shown. And this meant Colonial Marines remained a colossal failure for years after launch. That was until 2017 when it was effectively fixed by not Gearbox, but an experienced modder who discovered a typo in the game's code, which caused the Aliens AI to be janky in the first place. So after this simple typo was fixed, so was the Xenomorph AI. Still, it always took 4.5 years for someone to do this off their own back. Gearbox and everyone else involved should be ashamed. Number 9. Arctic Adventure. You probably haven't heard of this one. In 1981, teenager Harry McCracken released the game for the TRS-80 microcomputers as part of a publishing collection, The Captain 80 Book of Basic Adventures. However, this basic code of McCracken's game featured in the book, which players had already inputted themselves in order to play, was incorrect, meaning the game wouldn't run properly. But because McCracken didn't keep a copy of the book himself, he wasn't easily able to fix it, so he just moved on. 4 decades later, however, he received a copy of the original book and used an emulator to resurrect the old code, and by doing so discovered that it was missing an O, which prevented players from using an objective, so they couldn't finish the game. He's since included a correct version of the game on his own website for all to play. Number 8. Final Fantasy XIV. The original version of this MMORPG was released in 2010 and was immediately panned by press and players alike, who criticised basically every aspect of the gameplay, as it was incomplete and in some cases broken. Square Enix responded straight away by suspending subscriber fees and replacing key creative personnel, before the game was shut down in November 2012, barely 2 years after release. But in August 2013, almost 3 years after the disastrous launch, Final Fantasy XIV was resurrected with A Realm Reborn. This fixed version of the game is a critical and commercial success, with over 22 million registered players this year alone. Even though we shouldn't forget how broken this game was at launch, Square Enix should get some credit for this. Not many publishers go back and make sure their game's fixed. Word on Square, just don't do it again. Number 7. Sonic 3D Blast. 2 years before Sonic Adventures brought 3D Sonic to the mainstream, 1996's Sonic 3D Blast did so considerably with muted fanfare, as fans complained about the litany of frustrating gameplay elements. The most prominent being that Sonic was sluggish and not speedy. He wasn't going fast enough, and we know he needs to go fast. Not only that, but the floaty camera and controls made this one hard to play. The hitboxes were all over the place, and there was a ton of physics bugs, and this caused some fans to consider this one outright broken, bringing Sonic's tenure on the Mega Drive to a most deflating end. But in 2017, some 21 years after the game originally released, the lead programmer of the Mega Drive version, John Burton, released his own unofficial Director's Cut patch online. The patch would be installed on any ROM version of Sonic 3D Blast, and just about fixed every major mechanical issue in the game, and even some extra elements that didn't make the final cut, such as the missing crab enemy. Though Burton's update is in no way official, it's recommended to finally enjoy Sonic 3D Blast how it was meant to be played. Number 6. Daikatana. Hyped to the ends of the earth by a wildly over-the-top marketing campaign, which culminated in a post that's ridiculed widely today that claimed that John Romero was about to make you his bitch. After several delays, Daikatana finally released, and nobody liked it. In addition to it being shockingly formulaic, it was overloaded with bugs and glitches. While the friendly AI was utterly terrible, the limited number of saves per level made this feel engineered to piss people off. Daikatana was a chore to play through, and probably most players didn't bother to finish this one, considering that this game wasn't really finished in the first place, so why should you bother? Within a few months of its release, Romero dropped a final patch and then moved on for good. Though several years later, however, fan Martin Mueller got in contact contact with Romero and convinced him to send him the game's source code so he could fix it himself. Mueller found the corrupted parts of the code and spent years fixing it until he eventually whipped it into shape. In 2016, he released a 1.3 patch which improved AI and fixed countless bugs and even boosted the graphics. And whether or not that's a reason to go back to this one, well, that's up to you. Number 5. Tomb Raider: The Angel of Darkness. This game was the first entry for the legendary action series on the PlayStation 2, and expectations were very, very high. Sadly, you didn't need to play this one for long to realise just how rushed to market it was. This one really wasn't done cooking. Yes, the visuals were very impressive for the time, but that was undermined by the bugs and the awful controls, and of course the terrible camera. And despite the initial decent sales, the overwhelming disdain from fans led to this one being the first and last game of a new trilogy. Though most accepted failure and moved on with their lives, a small subset of fans refused to let go and went on trying to fix this one up on the PC at least. Literally earlier in 2021, a compendium of 16 patches and mod packs were assembled over the last 18 years since the game's release and was entitled Tomb Raider: The Angel of Darkness Rescued. Collectively, these patches fixed broken code and tweaked Lara's movement to make it more consistent with previous games. Fans couldn't believe this transformation almost 2 decades later. This really fixed the Angel of Darkness and gave it the justice it deserved, long after everyone associated with the project had moved on. Number 4. Gothic 3. 2006's action RPG Gothic 3 may have sold more than 500,000 copies within its first 6 months of launch, but it released in a broken mess, what with certain bugs stopping quests being finished and even caused the game to constantly crash. Fixing these issues was a mess in itself as well, what with publisher Joe Wood Productions and developers Piranha Byte parting ways the year after Gothic 3 was released. So without a developer to be able to fix the code in an official fashion, Joe Wood eventually decided to hand over the game's source code to a modern scene to see if they could fix it themselves. Though it took a lot of time, by 2012 a massive 1.5 gigabyte patch titled the Community Patch had been released, which rendered the full game playable again, and in 2014 another patch followed to fix even further issues. Efforts to fix this one are still ongoing, but at least the community is still out there to save Gothic 3. Number 3. The Halo Master Chief Collection. To this day, it's still baffling that the flagship game series, Halo, was messed up on release. Like seriously, this is Halo! Originally released back in 2014, this was meant to bring all the old Halos together for the Xbox One, way before we had Smart Delivery or Game Pass. But when players got their hands on this one, the matchmaking was messed up, to the point where developer 343 had to make a public apology, and despite claiming that many times they had fixed the matchmaking, players continued to encounter issues for years. This wasn't until in finally 2018 when 343 seemingly actually fixed it, though we should use the term fixed lightly, as some players still have issues to this day. Curiously, another broken aspect of the original Halo campaign was also finally fixed in 2018, because for some wild reason the version of Halo Combat Evolved in the Master Chief Collection was the janky 2003 port made by Gearbox, and remnants of this port weren't stamped out for years. And just a few months ago, 343 have finally tested an update which will remove this code for good. Either way you look at it, this is one of the biggest cock-ups in video game history. How do you mess up Halo? Let's just hope Infinite is good. Number 2. Scarface: The World Is Yours. As far as video game adaptations go of movies, 2006's Scarface: The World Is Yours is actually pretty good. Yes, sure, it was a shameless cash-in on Grand Theft Auto and especially Vice City at the time, but you've got to give it to the devs on this one. Though well reviewed at the time, problems arose on the PC version a few years later, because back then PC ports of any game seemed to be just messed up, and the game was only officially compatible with Windows XP and Windows Vista. Anyone using Windows 7 and beyond just couldn't play this one. But some 14 years after release, Mod Silent released a patch that made this game fully functional for any modern PC, fixing all the graphical issues and giving it a massive boost in performance. This essentially opened Scarface back up to players around the world, as they were locked out for almost a decade and a half. And again, this just shows how valuable fans and modders are to games. They keep them alive and make sure they live on throughout the years. This was a major victory for everyone. And number 1, Ys 8 Lacrimos of Dhana. This one was finally released on PC back in 2018, some 6 months after the original plan, and 2 years after it landed on Vita in Japan. And almost immediately after release, the PC version was ripped apart by disappointed fans, who complained about almost every aspect of the graphics and gameplay being broken. This went from basic resolution to mouse and keyboard support. Though the next few months saw patches released to smooth over the game's issues, it wasn't really playable until 2020, when legendary modder fixer Peter Durante Toman stepped in to provide an additional overhaul. Beyond further tidying up graphic and gameplay issues, he also included an experimental 2-player co-op mode, because why the hell not? So this meant Ys fans waiting to play this game on the PC in fully working order only had to wait 3.5 years to play it. It was either that or dig out a dead Vita in the drawer, and who wants to do that? And that's our list. That's 10 broken video games that were fixed years later. Can you think of any more? Of course you can. So let us know down in the comments below, and don't forget to like, share and subscribe. And while you're down there, go and follow us on Twitter at WCulture Gaming and me at Ben Returner. And on Instagram as well. Why not? Anyway, until next time, no more games.